Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists here in San Diego. And Joe Miller, the Christos In Man. Thank you very, very much for doing this, Joe.
You're welcome. Was Ken going to do a reading?
Good afternoon. So who we have from the Jewel in the Lotus, reading number 231, The Christ Soul. Now, and now my grief I see, was but that ancient shadow part of me, not yet attuned to good, still blind and senseless in its warring mood. I turn from it and climb to the heroic spirit of the prime, the light that well foreknew all the dark ways that it must journey through, yet seeing still again a distant glory o'er the hill of pain. Through all that chaos wild, a breath as gentle as a little child, through earth transformed, divine, the Christ soul of the universe to shine. That's by George William Russell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Whenever it becomes around Easter time, I always think of this quotation from H.P. Blavatsky, which I like very much. And this comes from her famous article, The Esoteric Character of the Gospels. And I think probably most of you have seen this quote before. Oops, sorry. I was trying to move something out of the way. There we go. The coming of Christ means the presence of Christos in a regenerated world, and not at all the actual coming in body of Christ Jesus. This Christ is to be sought neither in the wilderness, nor in the inner chambers, nor in the sanctuary of any temple or church built by man. For Christ, the true esoteric Savior, is no man, but the divine principle in every human being. He who strives to resurrect the spirit crucified in him by his own terrestrial passions and buried deep in the sepulchre of his sinful flesh. He who has the strength to roll back the stone of matter from the door of his own inner sanctuary, he has the risen Christ in him. I wanted to start with this quotation from Light on the Path. There is a natural melody, an obscure fountain in every human heart. It may be concealed and silenced, but it is there. At the very base of your nature, you will find faith, hope, and love. If this fountain is there in reality, it must be possible to affirm and experience it. It must be possible to bathe the mind in the primitive and homogeneous waters of an eternal renewal. Every human being represents a spectrum of consciousness, from the gross to the ethereal, from the physical to the spiritual. The mind principle is born from above and tethered by an invisible but unbroken divine umbilical, the silver thread that binds the soul to the master, in the words of the Voice of the Silence, explained as the higher self. That tether, however, is more or less concealed and silent, overlooked and overwhelmed by 1,000 contingencies of embodied existence, unless the right conditions prevail. The Hasidic mystic prays, quote, "One word from you and I am born again. One syllable and I am drenched in the dew of childhood." Jesus spoke of the possibility of a second birth, of being born from above. We are fathered physically of the earth earthy, but we may be reparented, fathered spiritually, if we draw inwardly in one-pointed devotion. The only lasting constructive change is a self-regeneration that comes from within and above, Only this can awaken us, radically reorienting consciousness from the outer world of effects to the inner world of causes, from psychic to noetic, from appearance to substance, from illusion to truth, from aloneness to belonging. Jesus spoke of the spiritual parentage that is true for every human being. He spoke of the Son of Man, the Son in Man, as Tolstoy chose to render it in his version of the gospel. The divine Son is in every man. Humanity is the temple wherein the divine sonship dwells. To everyone who received the word of the Galilean master, in the words of John's gospel, quote, "He gave the power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." There is an implicit Gnosticism in the writings of Paul and John. Paul speaks of the spiritually elect being freed from bondage to the elemental powers that rule the natural world. These rule the body, theosophically the lower quaternary of principles. But they needn't mold the mind after their own image unless that mind consents to self-enslavement. For the mind may be guided from above, noetically. In John's writing, Jesus speaks of the care each must take to nurture the light within, lest the light be lost before it has been fanned into a bright lamp that could help others to see. It is impossible to understand the words of any master except by the light that comes from above. That is why Jesus said that nobody comes to him unless the Father calls him. Every wisdom teaching requires noetic discernment to render it comprehensible and useful. The mere letter is prone to misunderstanding and misuse, a weapon for authoritarian control and division. The voice of the silence implores us to learn to discern. Discernment is the mill wheel that separates the flour from the husk. Foolishly taking up the husks and mixing them with Maya's dew, the dew of the lower emotions, especially, only produces food for the black doves of death, the birds of birth, decay, and sorrow. The voice goes so far as to say, quote, "Even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it." That is because the lower mind will run away with whatever gospel or shloka or sutra and imprison itself, or worse, others, in a straitjacket of dogmatism, superstition, and fear. And yet, with wisdom and discernment, we may prepare our daily bread, the bread of life, by kneading the right ingredients, the flour of wisdom and Amrita's clear waters. Can Christ rise from a dead tradition, a deadening dogma, an irrational superstition? Do the masters shepherd these spiritual impulses through the archetypal cyclic phases of the rise of inspiration, the plateau of dead letter, the decline of distortion, and the resurrection of reform? Jesus spoke of himself as the Good Shepherd. What sense do we make out of the many changes in Christian history? We can identify attempts at reform and renewal. Those of us who believe that true religion must be a wisdom religion might recognize our own responsibility for helping, in small ways, to purify and renew the Christian impulse. As Jesus said, the harvest is ready, but the workers are few. A drop of water is suggestive of an ocean. There are examples of such awakenings. There are those who have let the Jesus of theology die to allow the resurrection of the spiritual Christos. Henry David Thoreau speaks of his own awakening in his first book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. In early life, he harbored only revulsion toward churches, preachers, and services. In his early 20s, he explored many wisdom traditions. If you've been watching the PBS special on Thoreau, which I recommend, it speaks about how Emerson, when he was editing the Dial, asked Henry to explore the ancient other wisdom traditions and write about them. Thoreau finally read the Gospels for himself, and he was delighted by what he found. When he tried to encourage his friends on the subject in a gush of new enthusiasm, they would turn off. They could not get past their own conditioning. The subject carried an impenetrable cloud of weariness about it. They had no ears to hear. Thoreau wrote about the Gospels, "I love this book rarely. I know of no book that has so few readers. There is none so truly strange and heretical and unpopular." Of course, with that, I connect that bit of irony with something else he says in Walden, where he says that the act of reading, the true act of reading, is the most exerting thing a human being can do. So who truly reads the Gospels, in other words? Of course, Thomas Jefferson's Bible is well known. With scissors and glue, he edited the New Testament for his own personal use, saving the wisdom and disposing of anything that smacked of fable and legend. The miracles, of course, had to go, lover of science, as Jefferson was. Leo Tolstoy is a striking example. His conversion in his 50s saved him from suicide and led to the training of his critical faculties upon the Christianity of his day. He distinguished between institutional churchianity and the true teachings of Christ, which he considered radical, relevant, and universal. Tolstoy went back to Greek manuscripts and translated and edited his own version of the four Gospels, combined into one, the Gospel in brief. Tolstoy presented a rather Gnostic rendering. The Son of Man is the Son in Man, the divine heir of Christos, universally distributed and present in all humanity. The heavenly life must be found and saved through the efforts of each human being. To lose one's life, in the words of the Gospel, is to lose sight of God's life within you. The divine imperative is to devote oneself entirely to membership within the inner kingdom of God. The life of time is food for the life of eternity. The life of eternity is found now in the present moment. It is not an afterlife replete with idealized pleasures of an egotistic existence. Tolstoy's Gospel in Brief made a deep impact on Ludwig Wittgenstein, who found it while serving as a soldier in World War I. The strange and ever ascetic Wittgenstein seemed to burn with a passion for authenticity, and Tolstoy's rendering of the Gospels met his needs. He recommended the book to many people, with exclusive praise, and its influence seemed to play a role in his astonishing decision after the war to renounce entirely his family's fortune. And the Wittgensteins were one of the wealthiest families in Europe at the time. It is harder for a rich man to find the life of the Spirit than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Traditional Christianity, especially American evangelicism, has managed to objectify and theologize the figure of Jesus out of all moral and spiritual relevance. It claims to be the means to Christ, but constructs roadblocks, especially guilt, fear, and greed for personal salvation. Or worse, it mixes with politics, and conjures a warrior Jesus, supposedly approved by the book of Revelation, to sanction intolerance, vengeance, and nationalism. A federal government official recently even prayed for bloodshed and propulsion of the U.S. enemies into eternal perdition. Not exactly what Jesus had in mind when he commanded, "Pray for your enemies." And yet, a discerning regard for Jesus' teaching gives the keys for identifying the problem of life, egotism, and offers the remedy, altruistic love and inner spiritual communion. The heart of any reader could rise from spiritual death in affirmation of the beauty and power of that great Jewish reformer. No wonder H.P. Blavatsky wrote, no doubt with a certain measure of rhetorical irony, that had Christianity lived up to its promise, there would be no need for contemporary theosophical reform. And what can we say about Christ's teaching? Foremost, it was a consecration and purification of human relations. The spiritual, vertical dimension of life is conditioned by the horizontal, relational dimension. You cannot find God and hate your neighbor. You cannot love God and marginalize even one other person. When W.Q. Judge was asked by a correspondent to describe his yoga, he answered, "Cast no one out of your heart." Jesus said that before you approach the altar of the temple, you must rectify your relations with others. Leave your offering at the temple and go make amends first with your neighbor. He taught the forgiveness of sins and offenses of others. Everyone is rooted in the inviolable, inexhaustible self. And spiritual discipline can release vision of the true essence and possibility of others. If we unconditionally stood by the truth, how could the errors and lapses of others compel us to condemn them? It would be like rejecting the sun because of one sunburn, or dismissing the ocean because your kayak tipped. Emerson wrote, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. The actual behavior of another is a tiny matter compared to their latent spiritual potential. The future is immeasurably vast compared to the thin tissue of present conditions. Who is to say what might yet awaken within another? How they might make amends and stand by truth tomorrow? Would we define anyone by their weaknesses, nail them to a cross of their mistakes? The vision of Christos would not see them that way. We condemn others for the harm they have done us, but if the self, the Atman, cannot be harmed, what are the grounds for condemnation? Robert Crosby wrote in Letter 14, quote, "What a man has been through, or has appeared to have been, matters not at all. What does really matter is what he is now and what he is trying to do." And in Letter 35, quote, "Take the position that you never fail, nor fall, nor slip back, but that you have not been constant and careful in the guidance of your responsive but irresponsible instrument. Hence, you feel the effects, through it, of your lack of care." get hold of it, take care of it, guide it, and use it, but be the self. Thus, we find a rational basis for Christ's and Buddha's insistence on forgiveness. It is not a virtue of weakness and soft-headed denial, but of vision. And if we learn to view ourselves in this forgiving light, would we not find it easier to so view others? A few words on regeneration. A couple weeks ago, I was hiking with my young friend from Ukraine, Miroslav, and we found a brown fuzzy caterpillar walking with undulating waves along the side of the trail. We took his picture, and with the assistance of all-knowing Google, we identified the creature as the larval stage of the giant leopard moth, a big white moth with black spots. You can look all you want from one picture to the other, and you won't find any resemblance in the least. Google could have told me that a zebra comes from this caterpillar for all I know. But it is a fact that the brown, fuzzy, leaf-eating, dust-treading, earth-bound creature will, under the laws of its own self-evolution and favorable material conditions, transform into the fluttering, airy, nectar-sipping wonder known as the giant leopard moth. This transformation, of course, is hidden from view in the protective secrecy of the cocoon. When things go badly, that cocoon becomes a tomb. The transformation is arrested, and the creature dies in his own self-woven sarcophagus. But even when the cocoon, the pupa stage, it is called, and the word pupa is related to the word pupil, which is very interesting. Even when everything goes well, the cocoon is still a sort of tomb. It is the death of the creature that was. And at the same time, it functions as the uterus, so to speak, for the creature that is to be. And although the cocoon is a veil of protective secrecy, the penetrating light of although the cocoon is a veil of protective secrecy, the penetrating light of science, which is never daunted by opacity, has learned a great deal about the transformation that goes on within. The caterpillar releases an enzyme that literally dissolves the tissues of its body. It self-liquefies. And this self-dissolution process produces a protein-rich soup, which becomes a kind of amniotic fluid for the newly forming creature that is to be. It self-liquefies, yes, but not entirely. There are small clusters of cells called imaginal discs situated between the thorax and the abdomen, which remain unharmed by the enzymes. These imaginal discs, so suggestively named, are the seeds for the future insect organs, wings, legs, antennae, etc. These reflections on the larva, the cocoon, self-dissolution, and self-transformation reminded me of a statement by H.P. Blavatsky, which you can find in the birthday book she edited. Someone many years ago, I assume from the Santa Barbara ULT, smartly extracted 10 key statements from that book. Curiously, all quotations from the month of June, and grouped them together under the title of Aquarian Axioms. They are marvelous to contemplate, and I think of them as keys to the thread soul of this Saturday series, the Aquarian Almanac Dialogues. In any case, the statement goes like this. You cannot build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. The foundations must precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life. This rich aphorism can apply at various scales and levels. For example, what about the founding of a literal temple? Imagine a group of people wishing to organize or institutionalize a church or an ashram or an intentional community, any effort to forge a vessel for living wisdom. The aphorism seems to say that it has to be an inside job, so to speak. It is the spirit that liveth, the letter by itself killeth. You can't be merely Protestant. You can't only protest and hammer away at the errors and defects and perversities of previous churches or schools of thought. And you can't allow yourself to get caught in procedures and norms on the outside, anxious about meetings and conferences and buildings and rules. These are all dead stones. They are dead if they stand by themselves or for themselves. Of course, meetings and conferences and talks are important to us and have their place. But as Walt Whitman wrote in Song of Myself, they are not the me, myself. So if we are not to hammer away at modalities and structures, or the blasphemies and irrationalities of others, what are we to do? How do we build this temple? HPB says, right, the foundations must precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life. Now, this is presented as a factual statement, a statement of law. It's sort of like, this is how things work. We know it is a statement of law because of the logical qualifier must. The foundations must precipitate themselves. But it doesn't tell us what to do. There is no explicit moral must. There is a must not. We must not hammer dead stones. But what do we do to facilitate this crystallization from the solution of life? Well, maybe we take a clue from the larva and the pupa. If the stones are not to be hammered, perhaps they are to be dissolved. The pupa nature automatically releases the enzymes that dissolve its body. But for self-conscious manas, the mind principle in the human being, the true Son of God, that divine mirror where nature's purposes become self-aware, nothing is automatic. The enzyme for self-regeneration must be consciously applied. 40 years ago, when I first started attending lectures in Theosophy, I recall a meeting titled The Solvent of Self. I don't now remember anything that was said, but the title stayed with me. A solvent is what we use to make a solution. A solution suspends elements into a formless soup, like the protein-rich self-liquefaction of the pupa, making possible a potential precipitation. This self-consciously applied solvent must have to do with self-questioning. And it must also have to do with an attitude of acceptance or resignation in the sense that Mr. Judge speaks about it in his letters, with regard to all the negations that come from the outside, like criticisms or attacks from others, or setbacks in health or finances. And I say come from the outside only as a matter of speaking, of course, because we know that karma is one law and there is no real distinction between inside and outside. So we have to apply negations to ourselves through self-questioning and creatively accommodate negations that inevitably come to us from the outside under karma in such a way as to suspend the self-concept, to put the self in fluid suspension. We have to creatively make use of negation to form a solution that can accommodate an inner crystallization. One of the other Aquarian almanacs says, the discovery and the right use of the true essence of being This is the whole secret of life. And speaking of that PBS special I've been watching on Thoreau, here's Thoreau's pupa, his otherwise known as his cabin. And there's a marvelous letter 4 months before he went out there. He had visited his friend Ellery Channing in New York City, who I think was a journalist at the time. And apparently Thoreau was pretty miserable and didn't like the city at all. And when he got back, this was 4 months before Thoreau started the cabin project. Channing wrote him this letter that says, "I see nothing for you in this earth but that field which I once christened Briars. Go out upon that, build yourself a hut, and there begin the grand process of devouring yourself alive. I see no alternative, no other hope for you. Eat yourself up. You will eat nobody else, nor anything else. Concord is just as good a place as any other." Crystallization of what? What are the seed crystals? Are these not the imaginal discs of the larva by analogy? They would seem to be these sanctified and purified forms from previous existences, germinal virtues and abilities for further development. These seed crystals are the subtle assets and prizes, refined and secured through the Devahanic years between lives. They are not necessarily the personal dreams and wishes of the present life, which are often merely transitory and superficial desires. However, within the disciplined personal mind, their image may be reflected, a clarified glass for what lies beyond. So our job is not to choose these seed crystals, in my opinion, but to focus on the solution, making the solution, keeping the solution free. We must break up the angular mind and the stony heart again and again and self-liquefy, keeping the solution protein-rich and ready. This translates into an attitudinal alchemy that is ready for anything. Alert, free from preoccupation, free of expectation, flexible, spontaneously accommodating. I like to dwell on the fact that for the sage there are no interruptions, because there is no hardened sense of identity. He does not draw his self-concept in black Sharpie. All of what I've been saying, I hope, points to a truer view of spiritual resurrection. For centuries, the collective lower mind, being body identified, has rendered a Christ who is tragic because of a bodily death, and then victorious because of a bodily resurrection. Theosophy gives an understanding that goes beyond what HPB called a carnalized Christ. When the voice of the silence speaks of the chrysalis of flesh and matter, it seems to me to be suggesting something more than merely a metaphor. What about that butterfly called man? In the poetry of Walt Whitman, there is a hint of occult transformation. Quote, "I do not doubt interiors have their interiors, and exteriors have their exteriors, and that the eyesight has another eyesight, and the hearing another hearing, and the voice another voice." We find much more about this idea of refinement and consolidation of a subtle body in the books penned by Mabel Collins, as dictated by the sage to her. One of the most striking passages can be found in Through the Gates of Gold. And I will end with this quote. "The man who is strong, who has resolved to find the unknown path, takes with utmost care every step. He utters no idle word. He does no unconsidered action. He neglects no duty or office, however homely or however difficult. But while his eyes and hands and feet are thus fulfilling their tasks, new eyes and hands and feet are being born within him. For his passionate and unceasing desire is to go that way on which the subtle organs only can guide him. The physical world he has learned and knows how to use. Gradually his power is passing on, and he recognizes the psychic world. But he has to learn this world and know how to use it, and he dare not lose his hold on the life he is familiar with till he has taken hold of that with which he is unfamiliar. The man, having learned his lessons fully, casts off the physical life. Having learned his lesson fully, casts off the psychic life. Having learned his lesson fully, casts off the contemplative life, or the life of adoration. All are cast aside at last, and he enters the great temple where any memory of self or sensation is left outside as the shoes are cast from the feet of the worshipper. That temple is the place of his own pure divinity, the central flame, which, however obscured, has animated him through all these struggles. And having found this sublime home, he is as sure as the heavens themselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. This is Ken Campos here in the San Diego Lodge. I'll be the Q&A host for the latter part of the talk here. That was an amazing, completely new perspective for me on Easter, I must say, and the springtime and the spring renewal. Thank you again so much for all that. Let me start a first kind of a comment and question about the analogy that was in the latter part of your presentation about the dipterans, those caterpillars from your walk that turn into these butterflies, the whole imaginal plate or imaginal disc phenomenon. By coincidence, which is of course a synchronicity, not a coincidence at all, some 48 years ago, I was in San Francisco, UCSF, in Health Sciences West. I took a leave of absence from college, and my lab chief at the time had a son who was a postdoctoral fellow working on, guess what? Drosophila. So I was busy teasing out, the giant polygene chromosomes and looking at RNA polymerase at that. So I had a little delved into the science. Didn't get any papers written about that. But that is a fascinating thing, and I just love your analogy that our job is to maintain that protein-rich goo within ourselves, within our inner self, and from that we can use these imaginal plates or imaginal discs, these crystals from other incarnations from our karmic destiny. That's interesting. So I guess the question is, where did that analogy come from in your talk today?
Well, it came from walking the trail with Miroslav, my 11-year-old friend. Yes, it just, I think for some reason, I just looked into it a little bit. It's so, it's an age-old inspiration and wonder, the transformation of caterpillars into butterflies, and it's long been a symbol for Easter, but I think there's a very deep occult side to it. It's not just simply a, happy flowers and daisies sort of things. It's something quite deep, and if you look in the actual science of it, it's absolutely fascinating, what goes on. And I think it just struck me that the use of, how do we use, what is the analogy for the enzymes, because we have to, for self-conscious manas, our transformation has to be, self-devised and self-created, self-induced and self-devised methods, right? That's the analogy from the secret doctrine. That's when nature becomes conscious in her organ called humanity. And therefore all these processes we see in nature can be self-consciously cooperated with and understood and induced through our choices. And it seems to me that those efforts at negation, as I said, are they have to be self-consciously and skillfully employed. And I think it takes a long time to learn how to do that. How does one question oneself but not beat up on oneself? How does one take the experiences of opposition from the outside and use them creatively? Sometimes this phrase is tossed around, the creative use of suffering. Um, I don't know. I just think that's so interesting, and I think it's people who learn to do that create something else within them. A few years ago, I went to Amsterdam, and at the time I was there, I was reading um, uh, Eddie Hillisom's book. Eddie Hillissom was a woman in her late 20s, Jewish woman in Amsterdam at the time of the Holocaust, and she kept a diary for about 3 years. And I had read it 40 years ago, but it had been written in Amsterdam, so I thought, well, I'm going to Amsterdam, I'm going to review that.
Yeah.
But here you find a woman who, is using all of this uh, suffering and setbacks and in such a creative way for herself that she seems to be able to be breaking down that lower false self cohesion that we call the kama manas or the kama rupa. Somehow she's using it to question herself and break that down, and clearly she's liberating something else within her. Um, which makes her say, shyly in her diaries, well, I'm not going to tell anybody else this because they wouldn't understand, but this is the most exciting time of my life, and and I can see the faces of God in everyone, and it's so there is this skill somehow of in transformation. There has to be destruction in order for there to be regeneration, and we have to self-consciously take part in that destruction. So how do we do that? Clearly it happens at the mental level through how we question concepts, and it happens at the emotional level through how we learn new ways of feeling.
Yes, thank you very much. That really does, I think, point to this Shiva energy, and then in the voice of the silence in the beginning, first fragment about killing off the lunar form.
Yes.
Death, and then after that, a transformative rebirth. We do have a question from Jonathan here, a comment.
I think he can hear me. Joe, do you think that in the sheer, on the surface, preposterousness of the idea of that little fuzzy little thing turning into a beautiful butterfly, just the sheer seemingly unbelievableness of it, and yet it still happens. It's under law. It's under the universe. It couldn't be any other way. And do you think that there's some kind of analogy within ourselves where we shortchange ourselves and we think that an actual transformation kind of is preposterous, that we can't get our visualization around that? And yet, on the other hand, in a universe of law, it very well could be.
Yes, it's the law of its own self-evolution, and there's some law ruling our self-evolution as well, and the limitations of our imagination probably oftentimes limit us. If what is it? If hopes may be dupes, doubts may be traitors, and I think our doubts are often traitors in that regard, and maybe it's a matter of slowly inching oneself along in the dark. That is, we don't have a very clear conception, but we can gain an active faith in the direction. There's something self-validating about the next step and the next breath and the next action that we take. And I think that can be enough. I think about Gandhi. He loved that um, that chant uh, about one step is enough for me. And so, and the poets have talked about the timid light of faith, walking through the fog. You can only see what is directly before you. So but it is true. I mean, it's true in theosophical doctrine. Whatever it is that we're transforming into, we would find it unimaginable.
Yes, that is a wonderful, I think, intellectual framework to see. We're going to some place that we have no idea what it is that we're going to. We can say words like Shayla and adept and a Narjol, but it's like, well, what are those things really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first quote from the Aquarian Almanac for today, Saturday the 4th, is "Unearned suffering is redemptive,"
Yeah.
by Martin Luther King Jr., MLK Jr. Very much like the diary you're reading in Amsterdam. The unearned suffering is redemptive.
Yeah. If you've got the alchemical key and you can use it properly, you know. We know that the lower mind, the egotistical mind, misuses suffering, to build up the sad story of myself, um, the sad story of how I've gotten the short end of the stick and how the world is against me and how I'm forever misunderstood. And it creates wraps itself in a cocoon that leads nowhere.
And even like that USA evangelical Christian politician who's using the warrior Jesus, to smite the enemies. That's a very evocative image, and I think a real distortion that comes from that tanha, from that urge to hold on to the lower personality.
Mm.
And looks like we got someone coming in to join us. And one question, Joe, from the also from the Aquarian Almanac, is this quote from none other than Jesus, presumably something written down in the New Testament. As I understand, Jesus actually didn't write anything himself; it was all written after the fact. So here it is: if the flesh came into being for the sake of the spirit, that is a mystery. But if the spirit came into being for the sake of the body, that is a wondrous miracle. And indeed, we might say this analogy of the caterpillar going to the butterfly, that the spirit is, we can say maybe the butterfly, and then it came into the form of the caterpillar as the miracle. Would you say that's a good kind of translation of that quote?
Yeah, that quote comes from actually the Gospel according to Thomas. So it's an extra canonical work. That it was the Gnostic work that was found in Nag Hammadi in 1949. Although we had fragments of it, we only gained a complete manuscript at that point. Yes, it's a very interesting quotation, and um, I think it gives the notion of, for me, it communicates the notion of the so-called sacrifice of the spirit, the descent, the divine descent, that we think about the spirit as superior and the body as inferior, and yet in the process of manifestation, uh, those are just two ends of of one whole. Theosophical doctrine says that um, matter and spirit are two poles of the same reality, and it points to I think it's the Sankhya school in Hinduism that speaks about the polarity of Purusha and Prakriti. And so there's there's dignity to this theater of existence that we experience and the crystallization of matter and its value for giving experience that can't happen in any other way. And each of us represents the descent of spirit into this incarnated existence. And so, and every time a divine instructor comes to the earth and takes on the culture and language and conditions and limitations of that particular focus, that kind of specialization, that is a kind of sacrifice. There's something much larger is being put into a much smaller situation. And that's for the sake of those who are incarnated, at the time.
Yes, that really is a sacrifice, and again, that goes well with the Easter theme, which is kind of a theme of sacrifice and rebirth, very much like the caterpillar and the butterfly. So sacrifice and death and then rebirth. Very fascinating stuff. I wanted to again shout out and invite the people in Zoom land to raise a hand if you have a question or just a comment, even without a question. Please feel free to do so. and also turn our conversation here to the idea of forgiveness, because you were talking about the Jefferson Bible and those other sorts of ideas, and how important forgiveness is, and that both the Buddha and the Mediterranean Jesus Christ from the Middle East was talking about forgiveness. And that's a fascinating thing. And certainly, even in the 12-step world, there's step 4 and 5, which is its own kind of odd modern spiritual path, the 12-step world, to look at one's own foibles. And actually, it starts by looking at things that you're resentful for, that you feel some sense of vengeance is needed because someone did a bad thing to me. And then ultimately, you can see then your side of the coin, and then in that, have this redemptive experience of forgiving them to some extent, but also then allowing yourself to forgive yourself. And it's interesting how you talked about these outer distractions are really part of that inner karma. There really isn't an outer and an inner in the Adi Shankara kind of perspective. But yet it seems that way. It seems that we're caught in this delusion of separateness and this personality, this tanha, this egoic identity. And so forgiveness is very important. And what if you had anything else to amplify what you already presented about forgiveness?
It's very important because forgiveness is unforgivable to the egotistic self. In the world doesn't understand. If we understand the world to be the kama manasic way of doing business, forgiveness makes no sense. It sounds like you're going belly up. It sounds like you're surrendering something. It sounds like the virtue of the weak to avoid escalation or further punishment. That's always how it's mischaracterized. But it's a very profound idea. I mean, at one level, it's looked at as the way to stop escalation and the cycle of vengeance. So the cycle of vengeance goes on, and we look at the Middle East, look at the long cultural memories of things that have been done, and there develops a whole of crimes that have been committed and losses that have been suffered, and then there is an honor thing built into the culture that you must avenge somebody who has harmed your family or somebody who has harmed your nation. So it's unforgiveness is built into that, and but as the Buddha says in that first section of the Dhammapada, this forgiveness is the way to stop the cycle of vengeance. So that's certainly one way to look at it. Another way is from the standpoint of karma. If nothing is under karma is greater than we can bear, and if there's a meaning to everything that comes to us, then there's then to get caught up in lashing out and producing grievances about being aggrieved about everything that other people have done to us or that have happened through circumstances, because we can be unforgiving about circumstances as well as other human beings. We know what that turns into. It turns into a very toxic kind of existence, and that's why pop psychology today says that you forgive for the sake of yourself. That is, it's anger is like trying to harm somebody else by taking poison yourself. So there's a lot of studies on this. I mean, there's a lot of academic studies like going on right now, at Johns Hopkins and others about the psychology of forgiveness and the emotional health of forgiveness. But I think you need a philosophical basis as well, and that's why the teaching of karma is important, or gaining spiritually and conceptually a very strong sense of the invulnerability of the essential self. Remember that formula HPB gave about to become invulnerable in personality, impermeable to lower titanic forces, and immortal in individuality. So to gain a sense of this very deep invulnerability of the essential self, that at some level, even though you can tell the personal story, at some level, you have never suffered. You have never known loss. You have never known a gap of non-being. Death and suffering for that essential self are impossible. And to try to take, that standpoint in meditation, and to feel the truth about that seems very important in dissolving this sense of being aggrieved by misfortune or the sufferings of others. And if we can also learn to look beyond another person's, uh, defects and shortcomings, and see the essential light within them, and recognize in humility that we can't judge that light, that also goes a long way towards disarming uh, vengeance and anger towards others. So it is a very profound idea.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that amplification. And it comes to mind in the seeing the light of another person is this kind of thing that's become popular in California to say namaste to another person.
Yes.
Put their hands together. My understanding is that translates to something like the God within me sees or witnesses the God in you. And in a sense, there is a foundation, sort of a tacit forgiveness of everything else, and a great deal of acceptance of the other person. And it's also kind of sad but true that our culture, our little personality, little ego personality culture, has built into it so much of this idea of vengeance. There's a progressive rock band from Sweden. Vader Galmagan is one of their songs. It's about vengeance, and then of course the Quebec license plates are. I just had it up here, and Laura could maybe tell me how to say this better in French. Je me souviens, I remember. And they're talking about remembering sort of the corruption of France, being the colonization of Quebec, and now the French people are still remembering how they got their independence. And then, of course, in the USA, we have the Hatfields and the McCoys, these long-standing fights, or the Godfather from Chicago. It's just embedded in the little ego personality, our culture. And I think to keep alive, again, the analogy of the lysosomes, the enzymes that dissolve the lower self, the lower quaternary. Keep alive that analogy of the enzymes. To keep those enzymes fresh and doing their dissolving work, we have to continue to stay focused on what you were saying a moment ago, that the ultimate capital S self, the Atman, has never really suffered. And I think,
and I thank you, Ken, for reminding me about that what it says in the Voice of the Silence, that the disciple has to gain the faculty to destroy the lunar form at will. Very much the same idea.
Yeah. And
I think
Yairo.
Yairo.
Oh, we have a hand up? Yes. Jairo.
Jairo.
Yeah, unmute yourself there.
So, the Christos, could that be equated to Buddha nature?
Indeed. Yes. Literally the anointed one. The anointed one is not a particular person in history, although the figure of Jesus, Jesus Christ, we don't know to what degree he was a historical figure and what. I mean, clearly, I think there's good arguments that he was a historical figure, but we don't know a lot of details. But the point is, what has our imaginations done with him for 2,000 years? And it's preserved this very, noble idea. He typifies a kind of enlightenment and transformation and unlimited love and inward spirituality that speaks to us, because it's one of these seed crystals of a transformation that we all feel we want to move in that direction. So he definitely, the Buddha nature for sure.
Laura, hand up for a minute. Laura, did you have a question or comment there?
Thinking in terms of was mentioned about seeking vengeance and holding on to these negative ideas, and as it says in the Voice, and you gave another example of the lunar form, but it says the eye of spirit and the eye of matter can never meet.
Mm-hmm.
And And it's so practical. I mean, you cannot concentrate, you cannot contemplate, and you definitely cannot meditate properly on spiritual ideas and peacefulness and calmness if you are thinking of vengeance.
That's right.
You know, so, you can go one way or another, and that's the choice that we have, it would seem. But,
And remember the story of Buddha meeting Angulimala,
yes.
cruel robber and madman who lived in the forest, who terrorized people who came through and supposedly cut off their fingers and made a necklace with them and all of that. Now, look, I mean, he was able to look through all of that and see something else in Angulimala, and was
Yes.
able to touch that. I mean,
Yes.
if there's a greater example of forgiveness than that, and the stories of Jesus in the gospel are like that. He can look through the appearance. But we, the come among us, we want to crucify others onto the cross of their errors or the mistakes or the mischaracterizations that we've pinned on them. We build the cross and we nail them, and we say, oh, they can't go past that. That's all there is to them. And it justifies us generating contempt and hatred and exclusion and all of that. So, yes, to look.
You see, even Buddha, he had already moved beyond forgiveness. It wasn't even something that he
Mm,
thought about,
yeah,
because he could see the truth.
that's right.
He could see the essence of the being.
That's right. And I think all true forgiveness is that sort of vision. But that's a very good distinction, Laura, because it suggests that while we are transforming, our minds get caught between both worlds. And the word forgiveness literally means to give entirely. It's in the sense like forsaking is to give up entirely, or um, for there's a number of these words where that English root is used in that sense, that it means to so to to give entirely means to give unconditionally. It means you're not holding any qualms back. You're giving full regard, and you're acting unconditionally. That's really what it means. Because and I think it's only released when you see what is unconditional in another human being. What is truly unconditional allows one to be, so one's not giving this much and holding the other person ransom, or asking for a payback in any way. One is saying, I entirely release you from whatever the past represents, and I trust you. I give you into the hands of karma, and I fully acknowledge what is luminous and possible in you.
Yes, thank you for that. That's quite wonderful. And I see here on the screen, Desiree has a hand up. You have a comment or a question for us, Desiree?
Yes, hi. Hi. Thank you, Joe. That was wonderful. And what a
Thank you, David.
stunning analogy you gave with the caterpillar and the cocoon. And that whole imagery of dissolving the old stones through this kind of liquefying action. And it made me think of other words that were also used in this endeavor of working on our lower selves. And that another one is neutralization. I've heard neutralization before. And oh gosh, there was another one, but it leaves my distillation.
Mm.
Yeah. I wonder if they kind of mean the same thing. But what a beautiful analogy. And it's really making me think now about liquefying things.
Oh, good. I succeeded. Now you can all be as obsessed by this analogy as I've been.
I also want to speak to Laura's comment there about the forgiving nature. But we do need to almost get to a point where there is no such thing as forgiveness, don't we? Because as long as we feel ourselves in a position to forgive, we've automatically separated ourselves from the other person. So, I guess that's going to take a long time, but I think that at least recognizing that that's still a state of duality, and at some point there will be no need for forgiveness at all.
Thank you.
Again, that was beautiful.
Yes, thank you, Desiree. And that really does harken back to what Laura was saying of going and the Buddha having gone past forgiveness to just see the other person. And they talk about the precious human body in Buddhism as a faith. And it's not just my precious body, but it's the other person's body. It's everybody's precious human body. I see David Grossman has a hand up. David, do you have a question or comment for us this afternoon?
Sure. Can you say anything about maybe the flip side of forgiveness or repentance? Can you say anything about the idea of repentance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's debates amongst people who philosophize about forgiveness. Can it only be given where a person repents? Is there kind of a quid pro quo going on there? Is it contractual in a way that if you show a measure of repentance for what you've done to me, then I will summon up forgiveness? But I think I fall in the side of the school that that's not true. That in itself shows that we don't understand the nature of forgiveness. If forgiveness is to give unconditionally, and if we're saluting what is unconditional in that other person, then it has to be unconditional. It can't be qualified or held hostage just on the basis of that person recognizing their error. Now, that being said, we can see in rectification of human relations and in truth and reconciliation, measures of justice and all of that, it's enormously helpful when we have offended another person that we come forward and admit it. And it does seem to really facilitate somebody finding forgiveness um, in themselves and recognizing it. Repentance can be looked at as as an aspect of the self-dissolution I was talking about, because when we repent, it's a fundamental act of self-questioning and of taking a new direction.
Right.
And there's so there are these words like metanoia from the old Greek, which means a change of mind. But sometimes that word was used for repentance or conversion, to turn around, which literally it means that. And like the prisoners in Plato's cave who were hypnotized by the shadows, a true conversion was they turned around to see that the light was behind them and it was making the shadows possible. And so, something deeper like that seems to be what's involved in repentance.
Well, thank you for that explanation. We have a couple of things here. Jonathan here in the lodge has got a question.
Okay, so Joe, in your talk, you talked about how Jesus's message was, one of the things he emphasized so much was relationals, in relation to how we get along with other people. And then you even showed that slide where you were saying something to the effect of you're not going to get the vertical until you get the horizontal, something like that. Could you either correct what I just said or kind of take it from there? I was just curious if you could, as Ken would say, amplify some of that.
Yeah, I mean that seems so striking. It seems so essential to understand the message and the meaning of Jesus to me, is that because so much abuse happens in the name of the divine, so much injustice occurs because I have a direct line with God, with my God, and he tells me to conquer and kill all these people and take over their lands. So you have to put the horizontal first, which is what Jesus was doing, rectify relationships. And like Walt Whitman, in the faces of men and women, I see God. Where do we find God? In the faces of men and women, I see God. We have to experience the divine in that way. And then in Jesus' teaching, it's when we do that then the inner portal, the vertical dimension to the Father, can open up. But you, and so yeah, I just think it's very important, and you can see where from the world situation right now, and especially the situation of um, a very superficial and dangerous American evangelicism, there's a big problem with this very issue.
So, and Jonathan had another
And just to follow up,
word.
just seems like what you're saying is reminiscent of kind of the whole thrust of the Theosophical movement.
Mhm.
The main thing even is universal brotherhood.
Yes.
And you don't have to buy into, you don't even have to meditate. I mean, that's the only way to really get anywhere. But what I'm saying is, it's not. You don't have to assent to the idea of meditation. You don't have to give assent to the rounds and races, all that vertical involution, evolution stuff. That's all primary and fundamental. But the main thing is universal brotherhood. It's like how we regard other people. And interesting, that word universal is that unconditionality that you've been talking about.
You could, by analogy, you could think of like, the way that various there can be very international hobby clubs or particular scientific niches or particular literary niches, the International Conference of Chess Players, and people come together and they all respect chess, and it creates a sense of fellowship amongst them because of their common focus. But think about the Theosophical movement. The Theosophical movement is saying we generate a respect and a deepening understanding of all the different wisdom traditions and all the different nations. It's not just chess, and it's not just soccer or something like that. It's if we can learn to salute the very essence of these wisdom traditions, which have so often been used for division and authoritarian control, and if we can find a respect there, what stronger basis could there be for really finding universal human fellowship?
Thank you. And Laura, can you go first, and then Marion to kind of take us home here at the end of the hour. Laura,
Just considering what Jonathan said about universal brotherhood, could we see that as the solvent of all things?
Yeah, I guess yes, in some sense, right. And then there comes the question: is how do we make that solvent? And it absolutely that seems to me to be what it comes from. And then if a person gets really interested in, well, universal brotherhood, how do I generate active, strong feelings of fellowship for others? If a person wants to move in that direction, then they begin to start thinking about the mental and moral and spiritual disciplines that they need.
The things that comes to mind in that is not seeing that someone else is doing something to you. Just see it as a cosmic force coming through them. It has nothing to do with them personally. It is, and sometimes you'll find out later that they had no idea that they were doing something that was hurting you. No idea at all.
Yeah.
So it really does indicate that it's just a force, a karmic force coming through someone. And that maybe we need to, part of the dissolving is seeing it as that and not as persons, just as a force.
That's very helpful. Yes.
Moving to the abstraction is a huge theme that we talk about here in the San Diego Lodge among ourselves. And Marianne, you want to take us home as we close down the meeting?
Oh, well, thank you. That was such a magnificent talk. I just wanted to make the comment that it seems interesting that this is Easter, and at the same time, the Artemis, the spaceship, is on its way to the moon. And one of the amazing aspects of that was that one astronaut, I'm sorry, I don't recall his name, who's African American, and all of the astronauts are looking through the window, speechless and in an amazing wonder of the unity, of really the absolute unity. Because I know people have been talking about the most important thing is the universal fellowship and brotherhood. And the one astronaut said, listen, I'm telling all of you, we are all one. So from up there in space, it would be nice if we could all go into in outer space together and look at the Earth.
Yes, indeed. That precious
Imagine
marvel.
Imagine a future where it was there were instituted, intelligently coming of age ceremonies, and one of them would be, at your whatever it would be, your 21st year, you go into orbit and you see the Earth from afar. That would have an initiatory experience for sure.
Makes me laugh. That's a great point to end on. And happy Easter and Passover and just past the equinox. And Joe, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And just a reminder for next week, it'll be the Descent of Manas on Saturday, April 11th. Hope to see you all then. Bye for now.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you,
Thank
San
you,
Diego
Joe.
ULT.
Thank you, Joe.
And a few comments of thanks as well. Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Joe.